Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of How to Talisman. If you're an experienced Talisman player, you might enjoy some of the other Talisman content on the channel more than this, but we are getting to the point in this series where we're actually starting to play the game proper, so you might get some value out of this video even if you already know what you're doing with the game. So let's go ahead and select the elf, and then see what character the AI decides to pick. It has decided to go with the Ghoul. Now, all's fair. Let's have a look at the Ghoul and see what its special abilities are. The Ghoul is another what I would consider more advanced character, and the AI actually tends to play it rather well for the most part, but also because of the complexity of the character, we may find ourselves having an easier time playing against this character because it's being played by the AI and not an experienced player. As far as the Ghoul's abilities, when you attack another character, you may choose to make the attack psychic combat. You may not do this when you are attacked by another character. So basically, when you fight other characters in the game, typically those fights are done with the strength statistic. But the Ghoul has the ability, if he is attacking somebody else, to use craft instead. When you see psychic combat written in the game, that's referring to the craft stat. Whereas if you see the word battle written in the game, that's referring to the strength stat. As you can see, the Ghoul only has 2 strength to start with, so its ability to attack with craft instead of strength is very useful, especially in the beginning of the game. But also keep in mind that he can only use that ability when attacking another character, not necessarily when he's attacking a creature or some sort of card on the board. Whenever you defeat a character in psychic combat, if you choose to take one of their lives, add it to your own. So basically he can suck lives from another character, sort of like a vampire, which is kind of creepy when you stop and think about it, but we're not going to dwell on that. When you kill an enemy in battle, you may raise it from the dead and keep it as a follower instead of a trophy. You may have one of your raised followers add its strength to yours for 1 battle, after which it disintegrates to the discard pile. You may only use 1 raised follower per battle. You can see that there's a sort of similarity here between the Ghoul's special abilities and what the Minstrel could do with animals, except that the Ghoul can do it to any enemy that it fights, but they can only be used to aid them once before they're discarded. So this is a ability that you very rarely get the opportunity to use properly in normal gameplay. There are very specific situations where it's extremely useful and helpful, but those situations don't necessarily come up very often in the game. So it's a bit of a risk-reward scenario when using it, and this is one of the areas where I think the way the AI plays this particular character can be a bit hit or miss. Sometimes it will use this ability to great effect, sometimes it will ignore obvious opportunities to use it. And as you can imagine by the way that's written, it's a fairly complex rule that is going to require some subtlety in terms of understanding the right and wrong time to use it. But the Ghoul does have some other cool abilities, not the least of which being that it has 4 fate. You also notice that the Ghoul is of evil alignment, and the thing about being an evil alignment character is that it's actually very easy to get fate back. There's a square on the board that you can go to called the Graveyard, which will allow any evil character to get all of their fate back for free. So even though he's got a lot of fate, that's not nearly as important to him as it would be, say, to a good or neutral character, because he can get fate back so easily. And you'll notice that he does start at the Graveyard Square itself, so you'll get to see where that is right at the beginning of the game. All things considered, this is a bit of an interesting matchup here with our good elf going up against our evil Ghoul. But I think we should have a pretty good shot at winning this game pretty easily, just because I think our character is going to be more generally strong out the gate, which should allow us to take advantage of a few things in the early game. You might be thinking to yourself, wow, we've been here for a while and we haven't even started playing the game yet. But I did want to take an appropriate amount of time to really explain and delve into what the setup of the game is like, everything from the house rules and the expansions to character selection and that sort of thing. But now that we've actually gotten through all of that stuff, things should move along at a bit more brisk of a pace. So let's go ahead and roll the dice and take our first move. One thing about this game that's important to learn right away whenever you're playing it for the first time is that not all squares on the board are created equally. There are many squares that are simply there to allow you to draw adventure cards, which are sort of the catalyst for various events that happen in the game. But there are also special squares, such as the corners, which have abilities and rules associated with them. Down here in the lower right, we have the village. Down here in the lower left, we have the chapel. In the upper left, we have the city. And in the upper right, we have the tavern. As you can see, when I select these squares down in the bottom center, all of the rules and special cases associated with those squares kind of change in that information section. Now we also have a few other squares to keep in mind, such as the graveyard, which is where the ghoul is starting, which has some special attributes associated with it, and the ruins, which we actually have the ability to go to on our first turn. This square is particularly noteworthy because unlike most of the other squares on this board that will simply have you draw an adventure card when you land on them, you can draw 2 adventure cards, and in fact have to draw 2 adventure cards when you land on this square. At the beginning of the game, I consider this a pretty useful and valid square to land on because drawing cards is what's going to help you out the most in terms of progressing your character. So we're actually going to go ahead and do that and see what that leads to. Maybe something good, maybe something bad. Well, in this case, we get 2 good things. We get an extra gold from the first card and an item called the water bottle from the second card, which allows us to not lose a life in the desert. The desert is a part of the board that we won't reach for a while, but it's also nice to have this item available to us right from the beginning of the game. A couple things I will point out here. The number in the lower right of the image on each card indicates the order in which you will encounter the card. So when drawing multiple cards like this, the number would say which card you would encounter first. These are both 5s, so we're going to encounter them both simultaneously. But if there were, say, a 1 and a 5, you would encounter the 1 and then the 5. The other thing to keep in mind is when you pick up items, you can only carry 4 items normally, but there are cards available to you that you can take as followers that will allow you to carry more items, such as mules. We're going to go ahead and grab these, take our extra gold, and take our item, and see what the AI does. Here the AI has moved to another special square, which is the forest. As you note, that was the square that we started on. Now this is one of those squares that allows you to do something special when you land on it. In this case, he landed on it and rolled a 4, which means that he was safe, so nothing bad happened to him. The reason one might want to go to the forest square, however, is if you land on that square and roll a 6, you actually get to gain a point of craft. Now there's a complementary square to this on the other side of the board called the crags, which is similarly dangerous if you roll low on it, but if you roll a 6 on the crags, you gain a point of strength. Because strength and craft are such important stats in the game, a lot of times players will take the chance to land on those squares to try to roll the 6 and get the free point. But because it's statistically improbable that you actually will roll a 6, it's something you only want to do if you really don't have a better option available to you. Back to our elf character for the moment. Let's see what we roll for our next movement. I think what I want to do is move up in this general direction as opposed to down towards the village, and the main reason for that is in the beginning of the game, a good valid strategy is to go to the city square and visit the Enchantress, because the Enchantress will allow you to potentially gain strength and craft and spells with a minimal amount of risk associated with visiting her. However, once you actually start building stats like strength and craft, you actually want to stop visiting the Enchantress because the risk to you increases. But since we are at the very beginning of the game, let's go ahead and move towards the city and see if we can visit said Enchantress. Okay, so here's our first example of a stranger card. Strangers typically are drawn and stay on the board unless some specific event removes them. So theoretically, this card could sit on this square for the rest of the game. Much like the Enchantress, the Witch has a effect where when you land on them, you roll a die and various things can happen. As you can see here, a Witch lurks in this space for the rest of the game. If you land here, roll one die. And you can see if I roll a 1 here, I become a toad for 3 turns, which is very bad. If I roll a 2, I lose a life. But if I roll a 3, I gain strength. If I roll a 4, I gain craft. If I roll a 5, I gain a spell. And if I roll 6, I replenish fate up to your fate value. So this is a very important square because we are a good character, and this may end up being one of the only ways that we can actually replenish our fate points if we end up losing them throughout the course of the gameplay. However, we'll be taking a big risk in visiting the Witch because if we roll a 1 or a 2, both of those things could be bad for us in various circumstances. The reason you don't want to be turned into a toad in this game is threefold. For the next 3 turns, you will only be able to move 1 square at a time. Also, for the next 3 turns, you will only have 1 strength and 1 craft and be extremely vulnerable to enemies and other characters. And most importantly, any items or followers or spells that you're carrying when you are turned into a toad are either dropped on the board or thrown in the discard pile. So you have a lot to lose the further you go into the game by being turned into a toad. Here at the beginning of the game, it would be undesirable to be turned into a toad, but it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world. But let's see what happens when we roll this die. Here we rolled a 5, which gives us a spell. Pretty sweet. Let's go ahead and grab that. Immobility. Cast at the start of a character's turn before they move. If cast on the character whose turn it is, they are immobilized. May do nothing apart from negating this spell for the duration of this turn. If cast on a creature, it cannot be attacked but may be evaded until the end of the turn. This is a pretty useful spell in a variety of circumstances, but I think what I'm going to do here is just use it as an example of how to use the spell queuing system. So what we're actually going to do is go down here to this second tab in the bottom center, and we're going to double click on this spell to queue it up. Now what that should do is when we end our turn, it should automatically cast that spell on our opponent to prevent them from taking their turn and basically give us an extra turn. So we're going to go ahead and select a player because that's who we want to cast the spell on. Select the Ghoul and cast away. And this should prevent them from taking their turn so that we can take ours. Hooray! Alright, so let's continue our journey to the city. See what else we can draw. Oh, excellent. So, this card will be very useful to us. This is the Enchanter. An Enchanter seeks an able adventurer. To the first character landing here with a craft of 4 or more, he will grant one of the following wishes of their choice, then vanish. So we can gain a spell, a gold, a strength, a craft, a life, or a fate, or teleport to any square in the region. So that's a pretty powerful thing that we've just drawn. A good technique in the early stages of the game is to look at trying to balance out your strength and your craft. So you'll notice we have one less strength than we do craft at the moment. So we're going to go ahead and take the extra point of strength to give us 4 of each of those core fundamental stats. Now, this does change our thinking a little bit in terms of where we want to go and what we want to do. Because now that we actually have a point of strength to lose, we may be less likely to want to visit the Enchantress because we'll be risking losing that strength if we roll badly with her. Here you can see the Ghoul fights an enemy and wins that battle, taking it as a trophy. The thing about winning battles in this game is that the more battles you win and the more trophies you accumulate, the more you can buff up your strength and craft stats. For every 7 points of strength or every 7 points of craft creatures that you defeat in battle or psychic combat, you get to add 1 point of strength or craft to your character's stats. So that's the basic mechanic in terms of how you increase your character's strength and craft when you're not doing things like visiting these special squares that can give you the points through rolling well. So let's go ahead and take our next turn. Now we can go to the Enchantress, and I'm thinking that because we still have all 3 of our fate points, it may be okay to do that, even though we have a bit of a risk here. So let's go ahead and select her and see what our options are. Visit the Enchantress and roll 1 die. Notice again, if we roll a 1 here, we'll be turned into a toad. If we roll a 2, we'll lose our strength that we just got. If we roll a 3, we would normally lose a craft, but since we don't have any craft above our normal starting value, we don't have to worry about that. As long as we roll a 3 or higher here, we're in good shape, because we're either going to have nothing happen, gain a craft, gain a strength, or gain a spell. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So we're okay, we don't lose anything because we don't have any craft to lose, but we also don't want to re-roll this die because we might be unlucky and roll a 1 or a 2 in its place. So we're just going to accept the fact that we didn't get anything good out of that visit and move on. So one thing you can do whenever you're planning on making your move is to click on the square that you're thinking about moving to, and then click on the card that's on the square to remind yourself of what's actually there. I think we will take another chance with the witch, just to see if we can get lucky again. It also moves us back towards the ruins, where we can potentially draw 2 more adventure cards in a subsequent turn. Alright, we rolled a 4, so we gain a craft. That's pretty awesome. But that does make it more risky to visit the Enchantress in the future. So I think now that we've obtained an extra point of strength and an extra point of craft, we're pretty much going to cross the Enchantress off our list in terms of squares that we want to visit. So the only way we're going to want to go to the city in the future is if we want to take something to the alchemist to melt it down for gold, or we need to heal some of our lives. But because we're a good character, we actually ideally want to go down to the chapel in the lower left corner of the board to obtain lives because we can get them there for free. And you can see the Ghoul here managed to land on the ruins and draw 2 cards. Notice no evil character can have the weapon that they drew here, so this would be an excellent square for us to land on because it would allow us to pick up a weapon that we could use to our advantage. And also the pool of life wouldn't hurt either because we could get lives above our initial value. Let's see if we can get lucky. Hey, look at that. So let's go ahead and land on that square. Because the Ghoul is actually sitting on this square, we could encounter him and try to fight him, but there's no real benefit in that to us, especially considering what we can do by simply encountering the square and taking the cards that are on it. So let's take a closer look at this weapon now that we're actually going to get it. No evil character may have the Holy Lance. Add 1 to your strength during battle. Add 3 to your strength during battle against dragons. That's going to be extremely useful if we happen to come across a dragon. So we will definitely take that and the extra life from the pool of life and consider ourselves very lucky for how this game is going so far. So the healer is a very useful card, especially for characters of evil alignment, because it allows them to heal their lives for free, and in fact allows anybody who lands on it to heal their lives for free. It's a card that I might consider removing from the board, given the opportunity, because it only benefits the ghoul more so than us, since we can already get our lives healed for free at the chapel as a good character. But I'm also not too worried about it existing because we're not in a position to worry about trying to actually get rid of the other character at this point in the game. For right now, I think the healer is fine sitting there next to the witch. Because I am a good character, there's no way I'm going down here to the graveyard because that would make me lose a life. So my only real option here is to head up to this square and draw a card, which is a pretty amazing card, the Ring, which adds 1 to your strength and 1 to your craft. Now, when you add to your stats through an item, if you lose that item, you also lose the additional statistics. So, for example, I have 4 strength and 5 craft right now. When I pick up this ring, I'll have 5 strength and 6 craft. But if I were to lose the ring, say by being turned into a toad or having it taken from me by the other character, I would lose those stats because they're associated with the card itself and not actually bound to my character. But that's still a pretty amazing pickup, especially for this early in the game. You see now I have 5 strength and 6 craft, which makes me pretty tough in terms of the stage of the game that we're at right now. Most creatures that I come up against at this point in the game are going to be pretty easy to defeat with strength and craft that high. So I think we're going to go on continuing to draw cards. Let's see what we can get over here. Alright, Fairy. A fairy seeks a champion. To the first good character landing here, she will grant one of the following wishes of their choice, then vanish. Gain 1 spell, gold, strength, craft, life, or fate, or teleport to any other space in this region. This is very much like the enchanter that we encountered before, but yay for us, it's specific to good characters. So we actually get to take advantage of this immediately and get ourselves another free stat point. Again, because we're trailing craft with our strength, having only 5 instead of 6 craft, we're going to take the strength point and balance that out so we have 6 of each stat. With our weapon that we acquired, we actually have technically 6 strength in combat before taking that, but we could always potentially lose the weapon due to a variety of circumstances, so I'd rather have the actual stat match and not rely on the weapon to balance it out. Here the ghoul draws a follower, which is a relatively useful follower. It has some cool abilities associated with not having to roll when you land on certain squares, but nothing spectacular, nothing that I'm necessarily coveting or wishing that I'd have gotten instead. Here, because we're on the woods, we had the ability to go to the other wood squares, but I also kind of wanted to see what we could land on if we rolled the die. So let's take a look at this square for a second, and I can show you the card that the ghoul drew on an earlier turn, which was the instructor. Now the cool thing about the instructor is that you can actually spend 3 gold to gain a point of strength or craft. The only downside to the instructor is that you have to lose a number of turns for each strength or craft point that you learn. But because we only have 2 gold, we don't really have enough to take advantage of this card at the moment, so we're just going to leave it alone. But I did want to take a moment to point it out to you what was on the board in case you missed it when the Ghoul drew it. The other thing we can do though is head down to the chapel and actually pray. So when good characters visit the chapel, they get to roll the die and have potentially good things happen for them. Unfortunately, we only rolled a 1 there. 1 to 4 were ignored. Now, if we had rolled a 5, we'd gained a life. If we had rolled a 6, we'd have gained a spell. In my mind, it's not really worth spending the fate point to try to re-roll to get something better, because being ignored isn't really all that negative. So we're just going to accept the fact that we rolled a 1 there and move on. The Ghoul decides to go to the instructor, mostly because he didn't want to go to the chapel, because in much the same way that a good character can't visit the graveyard without losing a life, an evil character can't visit the chapel without losing a life. So that's why he decided to throw away that turn, even though he couldn't afford to go to the instructor and learn anything. Again, here we're in a bit of a pickle because we can't go to the graveyard, but we can go back to the square and draw a new adventure card. So that's what we're going to do. Alright, we get to fight something. But notice, because we've built up all these statistics, we actually have a fair amount of strength and actually have a decent advantage in fighting this creature. So things have gone really well for us in this game thus far. Because now when we go to fight this creature, we actually have a strength of 5 plus 2 on the modifier. If you're wondering how that works, that's 1 from the ring and 1 from the weapon. So that's where the plus 2 comes from. So we're actually fighting with a strength of 7 here. Now, because we are on the woods, we could evade this creature, but I actually want to take it as a trophy, so we're going to fight it. Our 4, in addition to our base 7, should give us plenty to defeat this creature. Yep, so even though he rolled a 4, because we have 2 more points of strength than he does through the modifier, we win that fight pretty easily. And now that creature has been taken as a trophy. Because we have 5 points of strength in trophies now, we only need 2 more strength in some form to be able to turn those trophies in and get an extra point of strength added to our stats, which is pretty sweet. Let's see if the Ghoul is actually able to win this fight. Nope, looks like the bear outrolled him. And that's good for us in 2 ways. 1, because the Ghoul lost that fight, he loses a life. And 2, because that bear is still on that square, that's a creature we could potentially go fight ourselves to get the extra points of strength that we need to turn in our trophies. Actually, let's go ahead and teleport over to this other square because it's a bit further than we could get even if we rolled a 6. And we'll draw a card on these woods. Oop, extra gold. Can't complain about that. So here we have the Ghoul going to the tavern, and you can see there he rolled a 6 on the tavern, which means on his next turn he's going to be able to cross the river and go to the temple in the inner ring of the board if he so desires. And the good thing about that, from a game advancement perspective, is your eventual goal in this game is to reach the center of the board. But the thing is, the squares here in this inner ring are actually a lot more harsh than the squares here on the outer ring in terms of the demands that they place on your character. So while it might be advantageous for him to come in here temporarily to, say, roll the dice on the temple and potentially gain a benefit from that, he's probably not going to want to stay in this inner region with the statistics that he has. But we'll see what the AI decides to do when its turn comes up. I think I'm going to head over to the forest here to see if I can actually roll a 6 and gain a point of craft. Now I don't actually have to roll on this square as the tooltip is indicating to me, but I'm feeling kind of lucky, so I'm going to go ahead and do that and see what comes up. Oh my goodness, there's the 6. Everything is coming up Millhouse at the moment for me in this game, which actually is starting to fill me with dread and fear, because one thing about Talisman is luck has a tendency to run in cycles in this game, and I have been really lucky so far. So I'm getting a bit concerned about the fact that I've gotten so many breaks this early in the game. So the ghoul did decide to go in and pray at the temple, and because he rolled well, he's going to be able to gain a point of craft for himself. So he's finally gained his first point above his normal base stats. Now he has 5 craft instead of 4. So good for him. And the hits just keep coming as I roll a 2, and I'm able to now go fight this bear and potentially gain another point of strength if I win this fight, and an additional life from the pool of life. Let's go ahead and roll again with our 7 strength with the modifier. Now we did just roll a 1 here, and the bear did just roll a 5. So basically what we have is a standoff situation. Now we've rolled an 8, the bear's rolled an 8, but if we re-roll this die, as long as anything but a 1 comes up on the re-roll from spending our fate point, we're going to win this fight. So hopefully that will be the case, because I'm going to do it. Oh, and there's another 6. We didn't just win that, we won it decisively from that re-roll. So we're going to go ahead and grab him, grab our extra life, and now you'll see we have this trade trophies option available to us at the end of our turn. So we go ahead and click on that, and we can select these 2 trophies. Now, you only need 7 points of strength in trophies to get another point of strength added to your character. And you'll notice here this is 5 plus 3, which is actually 8. So we will be wasting a point of strength here in this transaction, but I feel like it's worth it just to get our base stat boosted by 1. So we're going to go ahead and burn that little extra point of strength and help ourselves out in the long run.